CEO abandoned her with triplets. 6 years later, she returns to prove his own mother framed them both. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Gabrielle Johnson hurried down the corridors of Harvard Medical School, her second-hand lab coat fluttering behind her. Even after 3 years, she still couldn't quite believe she belonged here, a scholarship student from Roxbury among the children of Boston's elite. She clutched her neuroanatomy textbook tighter, a shield against the occasional glances that seemed to ask what someone like her was doing in these hallowed halls. The lecture hall was already filling when she arrived, breathless and flushed. She slipped into a seat near the front, ignoring the sea of cashmere sweaters and designer watches surrounding her. Dr. Abernathy's guest lecture on emerging neurological treatments was too important to miss, especially for someone determined to become the best neurosurgeon Harvard had ever produced. "Mind if I join you?" The voice was deep, confident, with that unmistakable accent of old Boston money. Gabrielle looked up into startlingly green eyes. Michael Whitman, heir to the Whitman Medical Industries fortune, fourth-generation Harvard legacy, and inexplicably smiling at her. "It's a public university," she replied, immediately regretting her defensiveness. "I mean, yes, of course." Michael's laugh was warm as he settled beside her. "You're Johnson, right? Your question about neuroplasticity in last week's symposium was brilliant." Before she could respond, Dr. Abernathy began speaking, but something had shifted in Gabrielle's carefully ordered world. Someone like Michael Whitman had noticed her, not for where she came from, but for what she thought. That first conversation became coffee after class, which became study sessions in the library, which somehow transformed into 3 years of an unlikely romance that defied Boston's rigid social hierarchies. Michael seemed genuinely fascinated by her intelligence, her drive, her perspective on medicine that came from growing up watching her mother clean the homes of doctors she now studied alongside. "You see patients as people first," he'd told her one night as they walked along the Charles River. "Not interesting cases or career opportunities. That's why you'll be a better doctor than any of us." Yet there were moments when reality intruded, like the Whitman Foundation Winter Gala, where Eleanor Whitman had cornered Gabrielle by the champagne fountain while Michael was occupied with donors. "You're quite the clever girl, aren't you?" Eleanor's voice was honeyed, her grip on Gabrielle's arm just short of painful. "My son is always attracted to interesting diversions." "I'm not sure I understand, Mrs. Whitman." Eleanor's smile never reached her eyes. "My son is just enjoying himself, dear. Don't confuse attention with commitment. People like us eventually marry people like us." Now, 3 years later, Gabrielle stood in her tiny bathroom staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 3 tests, 3 positive results. At 25, in her 3rd year of medical school, pregnant by the heir to one of Boston's most powerful families. The ultrasound a week later brought news that made her knees buckle. 3 distinct heartbeats, the technician said, pointing to the screen. "Congratulations, Ms. Johnson. You're carrying triplets." Michael's initial reaction gave her hope. He'd seemed shocked but pleased, holding her close and whispering, "We'll figure this out together." But then came the dinner with his mother, a dinner Gabrielle wasn't invited to. He returned changed, distant, his green eyes clouded with something she couldn't name. The summons to his Beacon Hill apartment came via text on a bitter January night. Snow fell in thick flakes outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the Charles River a black ribbon below. Once, this place had felt like a sanctuary. Tonight, it felt like a beautifully appointed trap. "You really thought this would last forever?" Michael's voice was cold as the wind howling outside. He tossed several photographs onto the glass coffee table between them. Gabrielle stared in confusion at images of herself with a man, pictures showing what appeared to be intimate moments. "Paul? My cousin from Montreal?" "Michael, these are doctored." We were having lunch, catching up. I haven't seen him since high school. Convenient, isn't it? The scholarship girl from Roxbury getting pregnant with not just one Whitman heir, but 3. My mother always said you were calculating. Gabrielle's hand went protectively to her still flat stomach. Michael, this is insane. I'm carrying your children, for God's sake. Triplets, he said flatly. How perfect for your little scheme. Scheme? Michael, I love you. We've been together for 3 years. His laugh was nothing like the warm sound she'd grown to love. You never belonged in this world, Gabriel, a Roxbury girl playing at belonging in Boston society. You're common, predictable, and certainly not the kind of woman who can continue the Whitman legacy. Each word struck her like a physical blow. Michael opened a drawer and withdrew a checkbook. The scratch of his pen was deafening in the silence as he wrote with precise, deliberate strokes. $200,000, he said, sliding the check across the table. Use it for the children, get an abortion, move to another state, I don't care. Just disappear from my life. I don't want your money, Gabrielle whispered, her voice barely audible. Everyone has their price, Gabrielle, especially people who come from where you come from. When he tossed the check toward her, something died inside Gabrielle. She stood on shaking legs, leaving the check untouched on the table. Walking out into the snow-covered Commonwealth Avenue, tears froze on her cheeks as she realized she had nowhere to go. The subsidized student housing wouldn't accommodate children. Her mother's one-bedroom apartment barely fit the 2 of them. That night, curled on her friend Lucia's second-hand sofa, Gabrielle made a silent promise to the tiny lives growing inside her. We'll make it, she whispered, hand pressed to her abdomen. I'll finish medical school. I'll become a neurosurgeon. And I'll make sure you never need to depend on anyone but me. Lucia, a nursing student who had warned her about the Whitmans from the beginning, brought her tea and a blanket. What will you do now? Gabrielle's eyes hardened with determination through her tears. I'll study harder. Work more. Build something so significant that one day, when he sees what he threw away, it will be too late. As she drifted into an exhausted sleep that night, Gabrielle Johnson couldn't possibly imagine that 15 years later, she would be commanding a billion-dollar health empire, and the man who had discarded her would be begging to know the daughters he had rejected. The eviction notice arrived exactly 1 week after Gabrielle walked out of Michael's apartment. The paper trembled in her hands as she read the university's official letterhead. Irregularities in your scholarship status have been reported anonymously. Until this matter is resolved, you must vacate university housing within 48 hours. She knew immediately who was behind it. The Whitmans were making sure she understood her place. Gabrielle called her mother from the payphone outside her dormitory, unable to speak through her tears at first. Baby girl, what's wrong? Diane Johnson's voice carried the weight of a woman who had faced hardship her entire life and still stood tall. I need to come home, Gabrielle finally managed. Just for a while. The next day, Diane helped her daughter move what little she owned back to the one-bedroom apartment in Roxbury where Gabrielle had grown up. The living room now contained only a worn sofa that would become Gabrielle's bed, a small TV balanced on milk crates, and the framed certificate of Gabrielle's high school valedictorian achievement, Diane's most treasured possession. It pulls out, Diane said, patting the sofa. Not comfortable, but it'll do until we figure something out. That night, lying on the lumpy pull-out bed, Gabrielle stared at the water stains on the ceiling. Just last week, she'd been falling asleep on 1,000-thread-count sheets in Michael's penthouse, the Boston skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Now she could hear the neighbor's television through paper-thin walls and smell the lingering scent of bleach on her mother's hands from a day of cleaning other people's homes. This is temporary, she whispered to her still flat stomach. I promise. The next morning, Gabrielle began rebuilding her life with methodical determination. First, she met with her academic advisor who confirmed her scholarship was under review. Next, she visited 3 banks, all of which denied her loan applications due to insufficient income. Finally, she walked into a small clinic in Dorchester that had a "receptionist needed" sign in the window. "Night shift only," the office manager explained. 7 p.m. to 3 a.m., 5 nights a week. "I'll take it," Gabrielle said without hesitation. "When can I start?" By week's end, she had secured 2 more jobs: weekend cleaning for a small office building and freelance medical translation work she could do in whatever hours remained. Her course load at Harvard remained punishing, but Gabrielle refused to drop a single class. "You can't keep this pace," Lucia warned. Visiting the Roxbury apartment with groceries Gabrielle was too proud to accept, but too hungry to refuse. "You're pregnant with triplets, high risk by definition." "What choice do I have?" Gabrielle asked, organizing her textbooks around her growing translation work. "I can't drop out now, I can't lose my scholarship, and I definitely can't ask for help from—" She couldn't even say his name. As her second trimester progressed, Gabrielle's routine became a brutal testament to her determination. She attended classes during the day, her growing belly hidden under oversized sweaters. At 7, she logged in at the clinic reception desk, using quiet periods to study between answering phones. Weekends were spent cleaning offices, her back aching as she scrubbed floors. On Sunday evenings, she translated medical documents from French and Spanish to English, her mother's native languages a gift that now paid their electric bill. It was during one such Sunday evening that Gabrielle found herself staring at a glossy magazine left behind in one of the offices she cleaned. Michael's face smiled up at her from the society pages, his arm around a willowy blonde whose diamond engagement ring caught the camera's flash. The headline read, "Whitman heir announces whirlwind engagement to senator's daughter." 4 months. It had taken him just 4 months to replace her completely. Diane found her daughter sobbing on the bathroom floor that night, the magazine torn to shreds around her. "He's engaged," Gabrielle choked out. "He threw me away like garbage and now he's marrying into political royalty." Diane sat on the tile floor beside her daughter, taking Gabrielle's swollen feet into her lap and massaging them gently. "Men like that don't deserve your tears, baby girl." "What am I going to do when they're born?" Gabrielle whispered, hands cradling her expanding midsection where 3 little lives grew, oblivious to their father's betrayal. Diane's weathered hands never stopped their soothing motion as she answered, "You're going to graduate at the top of your class, become a neurosurgeon like you always planned, and make sure your daughters never need to depend on anyone else." Gabrielle nodded, drawing strength from her mother's certainty. "Daughters. Call it a grandmother's intuition," Diane smiled. At 7 months pregnant, Gabrielle's body finally rebelled against her punishing schedule. During a particularly busy night shift at the clinic, the room began to spin as she answered the phone. When she woke, she was on a gurney, a fetal monitor strapped to her distended belly, and a concerned nurse checking her blood pressure. "Exhaustion and dehydration," explained Dr. Catherine Chen, the attending obstetrician, reviewing Gabrielle's chart. "Your body is telling you something, Ms. Johnson. You need to listen." "I don't have the luxury of rest," Gabrielle explained, wincing as a contraction tightened across her abdomen. "I have bills, rent, school, and 3 babies who will arrive dangerously early if you continue this way," Dr. Chen interrupted firmly. "Premature triplets could spend months in NICU. How will you manage that with your schedule?" The reality of her situation crashed down on Gabrielle. She had been so focused on surviving day to day that she hadn't fully processed what would happen when the babies actually arrived. Dr. Chen studied the young woman before her, brilliant, according to her chart notes from Harvard Medical, but clearly desperate. Something in Gabrielle's determination reminded Catherine of herself 20 years earlier, arriving alone in America with a medical degree no one respected and a toddler son to raise. "I have a proposition," Dr. Chen said finally. "I own a house in Cambridge with a small guest apartment over the garage. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, warm, and closer to the hospital and your school." Gabrielle's pride warred with her practical nature. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Dr. Chen replied. "When I came to this country, I was alone with my son after my husband died. A senior doctor took me in until I could establish myself. He called it paying forward. Now it's my turn." The following weekend, Dr. Chen showed Gabrielle the apartment, a studio with a small kitchenette, bathroom, and enough space for a bed and 3 cribs that Catherine had already assembled. Gabrielle stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness from a virtual stranger. She sank to her knees, pregnancy hormones and exhaustion breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you." Later that night, standing at the window of her new temporary home, Gabrielle watched snow begin to fall over the Cambridge streets. She placed her hand on the window, feeling the cold glass beneath her fingers as snowflakes gathered on the other side. "You're going to be born in a home," she promised her unborn daughters, "not on a sofa." Lying in the comfortable bed provided by Catherine, Gabrielle didn't know that this night of rest would be the beginning of a female alliance that would help her build a medical empire that would one day rival Whitman Industries. The first contraction hit Gabrielle with such force that she dropped the textbook she'd been studying. For a moment she sat frozen on Catherine's couch, hand pressed against her swollen belly, refusing to acknowledge what was happening. "No," she whispered. "Not yet. You're only 32 weeks. The second contraction arrived 5 minutes later, erasing any hope this was a false alarm. Gabrielle grabbed her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed Catherine's number. "I think I'm in labor," she managed, voice tight with pain and fear. Within 20 minutes, Gabrielle was being wheeled into Massachusetts General Hospital, Catherine striding alongside her, issuing rapid instructions to the medical team. "Triplets, 32 weeks, contractions 4 minutes apart, get neonatal on standby." In the delivery room, monitors beeped steadily, each screen showing a different tiny heartbeat. Gabrielle gripped the railings of the bed as another contraction tore through her. "My babies," she gasped between breaths. "They're too small." Catherine squeezed her hand. "Listen to me, Gabrielle. You're in the best hospital in Boston with the best NICU team. But I need you to fight now, and I need those little girls to fight too." Gabrielle nodded, determination replacing fear. "You hear that?" she said to her belly. "You need to fight, my small warriors." 14 hours later, Madison Johnson entered the world weighing 3 pounds, 4 ounces, her cry surprisingly strong for her size. Morgan followed 2 minutes later at 3 pounds even, silent but alert, eyes scanning the room as if conducting an assessment. Mila completed the trio at 3 pounds, 2 ounces, announcing her arrival with a series of indignant squeaks. "3 perfect girls," the obstetrician announced, showing each tiny face to Gabrielle before the NICU team whisked them away. Later that night, seated in a wheelchair beside 3 incubators, Gabrielle reached her finger through the small opening to touch Madison's translucent hand. The baby's fingers, impossibly small, wrapped around her mother's fingertip with surprising strength. "Look at you," Gabrielle whispered. "So tiny, but so mighty." Diane arrived the next morning, tears streaming down her face when she saw her granddaughters. She slipped the simple gold bands from her fingers, her own mother's wedding rings, the only heirlooms she possessed. "For their first bracelets," she explained, placing them gently on the baby's incubator tables, "something that belongs to their family history." The rings were so large they could have fit around each baby's arm 3 times over. The next 6 weeks established a rhythm of exhaustion that made Gabrielle's previous schedule seem leisurely. She would wake at 4, pump breast milk, and study until 6. By 7, she was at the NICU, spending precious minutes with each daughter before rushing to classes. Between lectures, she would find empty bathrooms to pump again, hiding in stalls to avoid the pitying looks of classmates who'd heard about the scholarship girls' triplets. Every afternoon, she returned to the hospital, where Catherine had arranged for her to have a small room with a desk near the NICU. There, Gabrielle would study between feedings, her textbooks sharing space with bottles of carefully labeled breast milk. "You need to hold them as much as possible," the NICU nurse explained. "Skin-to-skin contact improves their outcomes." And so, Gabrielle learned to read with one hand while holding a tiny baby against her chest with the other, sometimes reciting neuroanatomy terms as lullabies when nothing else would soothe them. One evening, as she sat with Morgan nestled against her chest, a commotion outside the NICU caught her attention. Through the glass, she recognized Michael's tall figure, surrounded by executives in expensive suits. They were touring the hospital's new wing, the Whitman Pediatric Center, according to the sign they carried. Gabrielle froze, instinctively turning to shield Morgan from view, though Michael never glanced toward the NICU. He passed within 20 feet of his daughters without the slightest awareness of their existence. When the group moved on, Gabrielle released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Morgan squirmed against her chest, tiny face scrunching in displeasure at being squeezed too tight. "I'm sorry, little one," Gabrielle whispered. "That man out there, he gave you his eyes but nothing else. And that's okay. We don't need him." The day finally came when all three girls were strong enough to leave the hospital. Catherine helped Gabrielle arrange the apartment, transforming the small space into a surprisingly functional nursery. 3 second-hand cribs lined one wall, while Gabrielle's bed occupied another. A changing table doubled as a desk, and a rocking chair served as both feeding station and study spot. "It's not the nursery I imagined," Gabrielle admitted, arranging tiny onesies donated by hospital staff. "It's perfect," Catherine assured her. "They don't need fancy things, they just need you." The registrar looked puzzled when Gabrielle arrived to file the birth certificates, 3 tiny bundles secured in a triple stroller Catherine had found at a consignment shop. "Father's name?" the clerk asked, pen poised over the form. Gabrielle hesitated only briefly. "Unknown." That evening, lying in bed with all 3 babies nestled beside her, against hospital recommendations but the only way any of them seemed to sleep, Gabrielle whispered to each one in turn. "Madison, you're the protector. Morgan, you're the thinker. Mila, you're the healer. And all of you are Johnsons. That's the only name you'll ever need." The system they developed was unorthodox but effective. Catherine cared for the triplets during Gabrielle's classes, Diane came on weekends, and Lucia stopped by between nursing shifts. During quiet moments, Gabrielle studied, often recording lectures to play while feeding babies at 3 in the morning. Despite everything, when exam results were posted that semester, Gabrielle's name appeared at the top of the list. "How?" demanded a classmate whose family had donated the hospital's radiology wing. "You have 3 babies and you still beat all of us?" Gabrielle merely smiled, too exhausted for confrontation. The truth was simpler than anyone realized. Failure wasn't an option when 3 little lives depended on her success. By the time the triplets celebrated their first birthday, a small gathering with chocolate cupcakes Diane had baked, each had developed distinct personalities. Madison, the firstborn, was fiercely protective, positioning herself between her sisters and any perceived threat. Morgan observed everything with calculating eyes, solving puzzles meant for much older children. Mila, the smallest, showed an uncanny sensitivity to others' emotions, patting Gabrielle's cheek whenever she looked tired. That evening, after the guests had gone and the babies slept in their cribs, Gabrielle opened an official-looking envelope that had arrived that morning. Inside was notification of a research fellowship. Her application had been accepted, with a stipend substantial enough to rent a small apartment. Tears streamed down her face as she realized what this meant. Independence, the beginning of her career, a home of her own for her daughters. The path ahead remained daunting, but this small victory felt monumental. Holding the letter against her heart, Gabrielle didn't yet know that the small research grant would eventually lead to the patent for the Johnson Protocol, the revolutionary neurosurgical innovation that would transform the treatment of pediatric brain injuries and build the foundation of her fortune. The letter from the research fellowship felt like a talisman in Gabrielle's hands, a physical promise that the future might hold more than just survival. For 5 years, that promise had unfolded in ways she couldn't have imagined on that snowy night when Michael had discarded her. "Mama, look!" Madison called from where the triplets were playing in the small living room of their apartment. At 5 years old, the girls had grown from fragile preemies into vibrant kindergartners, each with her own distinctive personality but sharing the same green eyes. Michael's eyes. Today was graduation day. Gabrielle adjusted her doctoral hood in the mirror, the crimson and blue of Harvard Medical School bright against her simple black dress. The journey from pregnant outcast to class valedictorian had been brutal, but as she pinned her hair back, she couldn't suppress a surge of pride. "Are you ready to see Mama become a doctor?" she asked, turning to her daughters. The girls, identical in sunny yellow dresses Catherine had bought for the occasion, held up a hand-painted banner. "Congrats, Dr. Mama." The letters were wobbly, glitter glue dripping, but to Gabrielle it was more precious than any diploma. The Harvard Medical School graduation ceremony blazed with tradition beneath a perfect June sky. As Gabrielle's name was called, cheers erupted from a small but vocal section. Catherine, Diane, and Lucia stood applauding wildly while the triplets jumped up and down, their excitement uncontained by decorum. Standing at the podium to deliver the valedictorian address, Gabrielle spotted a sea of faces that had once intimidated her. Classmates from dynasties of physicians, professors who initially doubted the girl from Roxbury, administrators who had reviewed her scholarship after the anonymous complaint. "Some people say that growing up means giving up on dreams," she began, her voice steady. "I believe that finding the strength to pursue those dreams despite obstacles is true maturity. Medicine isn't just about healing bodies. It's about perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges." As she spoke, her eyes found her daughters in the crowd. "The greatest lessons I learned at Harvard didn't come from textbooks. They came from understanding that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every time life knocks you down." After the ceremony, Catherine embraced Gabrielle tightly. "You didn't just survive, Gabrielle. You triumphed." 3 months later, Gabrielle stood in their new apartment in Baltimore, surrounded by moving boxes. The fellowship at Johns Hopkins represented both opportunity and upheaval, a chance to develop her research on neural regeneration, but also a move away from their support system in Boston. The apartment was small but functional, a kitchen with a dining table doubling as Gabrielle's desk, a living room with 3 small beds arranged against one wall, and a bedroom that would be hers. Pride of place went to the microscope on the kitchen table, already set up between unpacked dishes and coloring books. "Will we make friends here?" Madison asked that night as Gabrielle tucked them in. "Of course you will," Gabrielle assured her, though her own heart ached for the support of Catherine and Diane. "And we'll visit Boston for holidays." The triplets, now in kindergarten, quickly developed their own paths. Madison's teacher called within a month, amazed at her natural talent on the classroom piano. "She played Twinkle Twinkle perfectly after hearing it once," the teacher explained. "That's extraordinary for a 5-year-old. Morgan, meanwhile, solved puzzles meant for children twice her age, approaching problems with systematic precision that astonished her teachers. And Mila spent hours with Gabrielle's anatomy books, drawing surprisingly accurate pictures of the human body, especially the brain. "Why does the brain look like that?" Mila asked one evening, pointing to an illustration in Gabrielle's textbook. "That's how our thoughts have a place to live," Gabrielle explained simply. Mila considered this seriously. "I'm going to fix brains when I grow up, like you." Balancing motherhood and her fellowship proved even more challenging than medical school. Gabrielle established a ruthless routine: up at 5 to prepare for the day, dropping the girls at school by 7:30, research until 6, then family time until bedtime at 8, followed by more work until midnight. Late one night in the lab, Gabrielle stared at cell cultures through her microscope, the photo of her daughters propped beside Petri dishes. She'd been working on neural regeneration in pediatric models for months, following a theory that children's neural pathways might be reconstructed using a novel approach to stem cell therapy. What she saw through the lens made her gasp. The cells had formed connections following her experimental protocol, connections that conventional wisdom said were impossible. "Johnson? You're still here?" Dr. Patel, the lab director, had returned for a forgotten file. Wordlessly, Gabrielle stepped aside, gesturing to the microscope. Dr. Patel peered through, then straightened abruptly. "Johnson, do you realize what you've just discovered?" 6 months later, Gabrielle presented her preliminary findings at a neuroscience conference. Standing before leading researchers in her field, she outlined what would later become known as the Johnson Protocol, a revolutionary approach to treating pediatric brain injuries. The presentation earned her both acclaim and research funding, but the real test came that evening when she arrived 10 minutes late to pick up the girls from their after-school program. "I'm so sorry," she said, gathering them into a tight hug. Mama's presentation ran long. Morgan looked up at her with serious eyes. "Did they like your brain cells?" "They did," Gabrielle smiled, surprised by the question. "You're helping other children's brains," Morgan stated matter-of-factly. "We understand why you're late sometimes." That night, as Gabrielle tucked them in, she marveled at their resilience and empathy. Somehow, despite everything, they were growing into extraordinary little people. The call from Massachusetts General Hospital came 3 years into her fellowship. The triplets, now 8, were building a fort in the living room when Gabrielle answered. "Dr. Johnson, this is Dr. Thomas Barnes, Chief of Neurosurgery at Mass General. Your work on neural regeneration has caught our attention. We'd like to discuss bringing you back to Boston." The offer was exceptional, a position as a research neurosurgeon with laboratory space and clinical privileges. It would mean returning to Boston, to the city where Michael had once told her she didn't belong. That evening, Gabrielle sat with her daughters, explaining the potential move. "We might go back to Boston, where we lived when you were babies." "Where Grandma Diane and Grandma Catherine are?" Mila asked hopefully. "Yes, exactly there." Madison, always the protector, asked the question that mattered most. "Are you happy about it, Mama?" Gabrielle considered the question carefully. Returning to Boston meant facing memories she'd tried to leave behind, but it also meant coming home on her own terms, as Dr. Gabrielle Johnson, not as the rejected girlfriend of Michael Whitman. "Yes," she finally answered. "I think I am." As the girls celebrated the prospect of being closer to Grandma Catherine, Gabrielle didn't realize that her return to Boston would put her on a collision course with the Whitman medical empire, which now depended on technologies her protocol was about to render obsolete. Boston welcomed Gabrielle and the triplets back with a snowfall that coated the city in pristine white, as if suggesting they could begin again on a clean slate. Their new apartment, modest but spacious compared to Baltimore, overlooked Jamaica Pond. At 8 years old, the girls immediately claimed the bedroom with 3 windows, arranging their distinct personalities in the shared space. Madison's violin case beside her bed, Morgan's bookshelves overflowing with advanced mathematics texts, and Mila's corner filled with anatomical drawings that grew increasingly sophisticated. "It feels different coming back as Dr. Johnson," Gabrielle confided to Catherine over coffee in the hospital cafeteria during her first week. "Like I'm returning to claim something that was always mine." Catherine squeezed her hand. "You've earned every bit of this. Now show them what the girl from Roxbury can really do." Gabrielle's lab at Massachusetts General Hospital became her second home as she refined the neural regeneration protocol she'd developed at Johns Hopkins. The approach was revolutionary, using modified stem cells to create neural pathways where traditional medicine said healing was impossible. 3 months into her return, she encountered the case that would change everything. "Her name is Lily Reynolds," the resident explained, handing Gabrielle the scan. 6 years old, catastrophic brain injury from a car accident 3 weeks ago. parents were told to consider hospice care. Gabrielle studied the images, her heart sinking at the extensive damage. But something in the pattern of injury sparked a theory. The damage is severe but concentrated. My protocol might work here, if we modify the approach. Dr. Johnson, with all due respect, the neurosurgery chief interjected, no one has attempted this procedure on injuries this extensive. The risk is she dies either way, Gabrielle interrupted quietly. But with my approach, she might live. Meeting Lily's parents, a young couple hollow-eyed with grief, Gabrielle explained the experimental procedure with careful honesty. I can't promise miracles, but I believe there's a chance. Everyone else has given up, Lily's mother said, clutching her husband's hand. We'll try anything. The surgery lasted 14 hours. Twice, the monitors faltered, sending alarms through the operating room. Each time, Gabrielle adjusted her approach with steady hands that belied her racing heart. Come on, Lily, she whispered as she completed the final stem cell injection. Show them what's possible. 3 days later, Lily opened her eyes. A week after that, she spoke her first word since the accident, Mommy. By month's end, she was taking tentative steps with a walker. The medical community exploded with the news. Miracle in Boston. Neurosurgeon defies medical impossibility, ran the headline in the New England Journal of Medicine. Overnight, the Johnson Protocol became the most discussed medical innovation of the decade. Gabrielle's phone rang constantly. Hospital directors, research foundations, pharmaceutical companies, all wanting exclusive rights to her technique. Whitman Medical Industries is offering $20 million for exclusive licensing, her new lawyer informed her. They're quite persistent. Gabrielle felt a cold shiver at the name. Decline all exclusive offers. This protocol doesn't belong to any single corporation. Catherine found her late one night in the lab, surrounded by licensing proposals. You look overwhelmed, she observed, setting down 2 cups of tea. Everyone wants to own this. Gabrielle sighed. But all I can think about is how many Lilies are out there, waiting for treatment their families can't afford. Catherine studied her protégé thoughtfully. You know, you could create your own foundation instead of licensing to corporations. Set your own terms for how this technology is used and who can access it. The idea took root immediately. Within weeks, Gabrielle met with Sophie Zhang, a tech entrepreneur whose child had survived cancer after experimental treatment. I'm not interested in just another medical company, Gabrielle explained, spreading diagrams across Sophie's conference table. I want to create something that makes cutting-edge care accessible to everyone regardless of their ability to pay. Sophie's eyes lit up. Not just profits, but revolution. I'm in. Let's talk numbers. The Johnson Foundation for Children's Healthcare was born 6 months later, with a revolutionary dual model, developing affordable medical technologies while providing free treatment to children whose families couldn't pay. The first clinic opened in Roxbury, in the neighborhood where Gabrielle had grown up. Full circle, Diane murmured at the opening ceremony, now retired from cleaning houses and proudly serving as the clinic's volunteer coordinator. My daughter left here as a pregnant girl with nothing and returned to heal our community. As the foundation grew, so did the triplets' distinct talents. Madison's violin playing earned her an audition with Boston's prestigious youth orchestra. Morgan, at just 9 years old, solved mathematical equations that confused graduate students. And Mila began shadowing her mother in the lab, showing an intuitive understanding of neural anatomy that astonished Gabrielle. They're extraordinary, Catherine remarked, watching the girls during a foundation dinner, each brilliant in her own way. They had to be, Gabrielle replied softly. The world wasn't going to make anything easy for them. Within 3 years, the Johnson Foundation had become a healthcare phenomenon. Gabrielle testified before Congress about medical costs, her eloquence and practical solutions impressing even the most hardened politicians. International organizations partnered with her clinics, expanding the model globally. Investors clamored for a piece of the foundation's research division, now developing technologies beyond neurology. The official launch gala for the foundation was held at Boston's Museum of Science. Gabrielle stood at the podium, the triplets beside her in coordinated but distinctive dresses, Catherine and Diane flanking them protectively. The Johnson Foundation exists because of two fundamental beliefs, Gabrielle told the assembled dignitaries. First, that medical innovation should serve everyone, not just those who can afford it. And second, that determination can overcome any obstacle when failure simply isn't an option. As she unveiled the foundation's logo, 3 intertwined circles representing the triplets who had inspired her journey, Gabrielle didn't notice the elegantly dressed older woman who stood at the back of the hall, watching with calculated interest. Eleanor Whitman observed the woman she had once dismissed as insufficient for her family, now becoming a power player in the very industry the Whitmans had dominated for generations. Eleanor Whitman's calculating observation at the foundation launch was just the beginning. 3 years later, Gabrielle Johnson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office on the 40th floor of the Johnson Medical Tower, watching the Boston skyline glitter in the morning sun. The sleek glass and steel structure had become a landmark, deliberately positioned within view of the Whitman Industries headquarters. "Dr. Johnson, they're ready for you in the conference room," her assistant called through the intercom. Gabrielle adjusted her tailored Armani suit, a far cry from the second-hand clothes she'd once worn through Harvard's halls, and gathered her presentation materials. At 36, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had built an empire from nothing but determination and brilliance. The conference room fell silent as she entered. Representatives from the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and 3 major governments waited to finalize a groundbreaking partnership that would bring the Johnson Protocol to developing nations. The prototype costs less than $200 to manufacture, Gabrielle explained, displaying the portable neural scanner her research team had developed. This means even clinics with minimal resources can identify candidates for treatment. A delegate from Nigeria leaned forward. "And your foundation will train our doctors at no cost." Absolutely. Knowledge shouldn't be held hostage behind paywalls. The subtle dig at Whitman Industries' notoriously expensive licensing practices wasn't lost on anyone. After the meeting, Gabrielle's driver took her to Symphony Hall, where Madison was rehearsing with the Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra. At 11, Madison had already been invited to audition for Juilliard's pre-college program, her talent with the violin drawing comparisons to prodigies twice her age. Slipping into the back of the auditorium, Gabrielle watched as her daughter commanded the stage during her solo, the same determined tilt to her chin that Gabrielle recognized from her own mirror. As the music swelled, Gabrielle closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of pure maternal pride. Later that afternoon, she attended an awards ceremony at MIT, where Morgan was receiving recognition for a mathematical theorem that had impressed faculty members. At the podium, Morgan spoke with analytical precision about numerical patterns, her presentation slides more sophisticated than most doctoral candidates. "She challenges our graduate students daily," Morgan's mentor confided to Gabrielle at the reception. "I've never encountered such intuitive mathematical understanding in someone so young." As they drove home, Morgan scrolled through research papers on her tablet. "The Foundation's neural interface could work more efficiently if we adjusted the algorithm," she commented casually, as though 11-year-olds typically discussed advanced biomedical engineering. The day concluded at Massachusetts General Hospital, where Mila observed Gabrielle performing a delicate procedure using the Johnson Protocol. From behind her surgical mask, Gabrielle occasionally glanced at her daughter in the observation area, noting how Mila's pencil moved across her notebook, sketching the brain's structures with precocious accuracy. "You're certain she's only 11? The assisting surgeon whispered, noticing Mila's detailed anatomical drawings. "Quite certain," Gabrielle replied with a smile. I was there. The Johnson household in Beacon Hill, a historic mansion Gabrielle had renovated with modern simplicity, operated with the precision of a well-funded research lab. Mornings began with elaborate breakfasts where the family discussed everything from international politics to quantum physics, Gabrielle insisting her daughters develop opinions on subjects far beyond their years. The ambassador from Japan mentioned your climate change presentation, Gabrielle told Madison over fresh fruit and organic omelets the following morning. He was impressed that someone your age grasps the global implications. Morgan helped with the data analysis, Madison credited her sister, passing her the whole grain toast. And Mila's graphics on rising sea levels made it accessible. The triplets' seamless collaboration had become their hallmark, 3 distinct intelligences working in harmony, much like the foundation Gabrielle had built in their image. That afternoon, Gabrielle met with her board to reject a staggering acquisition offer from a pharmaceutical giant. $6 billion is merely their opening position, her CFO pointed out. They'd likely go to 8 or even 10 billion. Gabrielle shook her head, unmoved. The Johnson Foundation isn't for sale at any price. Our mission isn't about profit maximization. It's about accessibility and innovation. Across town, in the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Whitman Industries, the mood was considerably darker. Eleanor Whitman, now chairman of the board following her husband's incapacitation, glared at the quarterly projections. How has the Johnson Foundation captured 32% of our market in just 5 years? She demanded, slamming her hand on the polished table. Their pediatric neural division is making our equipment obsolete. A nervous executive adjusted his tie. Their pricing model is disruptive. Hospitals can purchase 3 Johnson units for the cost of 1 Whitman system, and their outcomes data is superior. Who is this woman to challenge decades of our dominance? Eleanor hissed, though she knew exactly who Gabrielle Johnson was, the scholarship student she had once dismissed as a temporary distraction for her son. When the call came informing Gabrielle she had won the prestigious Lasker Award, often considered the American equivalent of the Nobel Prize in Medicine, she was helping the triplets with a science project at the kitchen table, still wearing her surgical scrubs from an emergency procedure. "We're having ice cream for dinner tonight," she announced after hanging up, breaking her usually strict nutritional rules. The Lasker committee just called. The girls erupted in cheers, understanding the significance. Later that evening, after they'd gone to bed, Gabrielle stood on the balcony of her home, looking out at the Boston skyline. The lights of the city twinkled below, the same city where she had once walked heartbroken through the snow, pregnant and abandoned. In her acceptance speech the following month, Gabrielle addressed the medical community with characteristic directness. Dedication to excellence isn't enough. We need dedication to accessibility. Revolutionary treatments mean nothing if only the privileged few can benefit from them. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. From the audience, Catherine Chen and Diane Johnson watched with tears in their eyes, remembering the exhausted young mother who had once studied neurology while simultaneously nursing triplets. Standing on her balcony that night, champagne flute in hand, Gabrielle surveyed the glittering city that had once almost destroyed her. The Johnson Medical Tower stood proudly among Boston's skyscrapers, its illuminated logo visible for miles, 3 interconnected circles representing the daughters who had been her strength. "We built something they can never take away from us," she whispered to the night air, unaware that Michael Whitman had just assumed complete control of Whitman Industries following his father's stroke, and that his first act as CEO would be to order a comprehensive investigation into the woman who was rapidly outpacing his family's empire. Michael Whitman's first order of business as CEO wasn't what the board expected. Instead of addressing the quarterly projections or announcing a bold new acquisition, he leaned forward in the leather chair that had been his father's for 30 years and said, "I want everything we have on Gabrielle Johnson. Not just the business intelligence, I want to know who she is. The executives exchanged glances, confused by this fixation on a competitor when the company was facing its worst quarter in a decade. Only Eleanor Whitman's expression remained unchanged, her lips pursed in a tight line that betrayed nothing. "There's something familiar about her," Michael continued, staring at the magazine cover featuring Gabrielle accepting the Lasker Award. "I can't place it, but I feel like I should know her." Meanwhile, across Boston in the Johnson household, a different kind of investigation was brewing. Madison placed her violin carefully in its case after 3 hours of practice and found her sisters huddled in Morgan's room, voices hushed. "I think we deserve to know," Morgan was saying, her tablet displaying a complex spreadsheet. "It's statistically improbable that Mom has kept his identity secret without significant reason." "What are you two plotting now?" Madison asked, closing the door behind her. Mila looked up, her green eyes, so like Michael's though none of them knew it, serious beneath her dark curls. "We're discussing our father. Don't you ever wonder who he is? Why he's never been part of our lives?" Madison sank onto the edge of Morgan's bed. At 14, the questions had become more insistent, the absence more conspicuous. School events where other children had 2 parents. Medical forms requiring family history from both sides. The empty chair at every achievement, every ceremony. "Mom always says he chose not to be involved before we were even born," Madison reminded them. "But why?" Morgan pressed. "That's what doesn't compute. I've been analyzing our genetic markers from that home DNA test kit." "You did what?" Madison interrupted. "For science," Morgan shrugged unapologetically. "And I found genetic traits that don't align with Mom's lineage. Whoever our father is, he has some distinctive genetic markers, particularly for eye color and certain cognitive predispositions." Later that evening, over the family dinner that Gabrielle insisted upon no matter how busy her schedule, Madison broached the subject carefully. "Mom, we're 14 now. Don't you think we have a right to know more about our father?" Gabrielle's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She'd known this day would come, had prepared for it, but the reality still caught her off guard. "What would you like to know?" "His name, for starters," Morgan said bluntly. Gabrielle set down her fork, choosing her words carefully. "He was someone I met at Harvard. When I told him I was pregnant, he made it very clear he wanted no part of our lives." "But why keep his identity secret?" Mila asked, her natural empathy making her tone gentle where her sisters had been demanding. "To protect you," Gabrielle answered honestly. "He rejected you before you were born. I didn't want you carrying that specific pain." "Did you love him?" Mila's question hung in the air, piercing Gabrielle's carefully constructed defenses. Before she could answer, her phone rang, Catherine Chen calling about an emergency surgery. The conversation shifted. The moment passed, but the question lingered, unanswered. In Morgan's room that night, the investigation continued. Her makeshift laboratory, a gift from Gabrielle who understood her daughter's scientific curiosity, had become command central for what the triplets now called Operation Paternity. "Look at these markers," Morgan pointed to her computer screen where genetic data scrolled. "These indicate a high probability of Northern European ancestry, likely with genetic factors for height, green eyes, and certain artistic predispositions." "Like my musical ability," Madison mused. "Exactly. Mom's side has some musical talent, but nothing like your level. These genetic markers suggest someone with significant artistic genetics." The next day, while Gabrielle performed a delicate surgery, Morgan stealthily collected a sample from her mother's hairbrush, adding it to her database. The analysis confirmed what she suspected. Certain genetic traits present in the triplets were completely absent from their mother's DNA. Meanwhile, at Whitman Industries, Michael's investigation yielded its first results. Dr. Johnson was a Harvard Medical School scholarship student same years you attended, reported the private investigator he'd hired. Graduated top of her class despite having triplet daughters during her 3rd year. Father not identified in any records. Michael frowned, a vague discomfort stirring in his memory. Who delivered her children? The investigator flipped through his notes. Dr. Catherine Chen at Massachusetts General. Catherine Chen, Eleanor interjected from the doorway where she had been silently listening. She's been a thorn in our side for years, currently sits on the Johnson Foundation's board. Michael's expression shifted as connections began forming. Catherine Chen was the head of obstetrics when I was doing my hospital rotations. Later that week, the triplets' investigation took them to the Boston Public Library, ostensibly researching a school project on entrepreneurship. Morgan systematically combed through business periodicals from 15 years earlier, looking for any mention of notable Harvard students. Found something, she whispered, sliding a glossy magazine across the table to her sisters. Harvard's Rising Stars featured a young Michael Whitman receiving an innovation award, with several students in the background. Among them, barely visible but unmistakable, a younger version of their mother. Wait, Madison said, quickly calculating dates. This was published almost exactly 15 years ago, when Mom would have been pregnant with us. Mila studied the photograph more closely, then pulled up a recent image of Michael Whitman on her phone. Look at his eyes, she said quietly, and his chin. The three sisters stared in growing shock as they recognized their own features reflected in the face of one of Boston's most powerful executives. The Whitman heir, Morgan whispered. That explains everything. Why Mom never told us. Why there was never any contact. They made a pact that afternoon, huddled in the library's quiet corner. They would investigate further before confronting their mother. They needed proof beyond a fuzzy background photograph in an old magazine. That same evening, in his penthouse office overlooking Boston Harbor, Michael Whitman stared at the same magazine spread on his iPad, recognition finally dawning. The scholarship student partially visible behind him in the photograph, the one whose intelligence he had once admired, whose determination had fascinated him, whose pregnancy he had rejected based on his mother's manipulated evidence, was Gabrielle Johnson. And if the dates aligned as he now suspected, the three brilliant young girls frequently photographed with the renowned neurosurgeon, the violinist, the mathematician, and the medical prodigy were his daughters. While the girls carefully returned the magazine to its shelf, they couldn't know that just miles away, Michael Whitman was looking at the same photographic evidence on his iPad, finally understanding why Gabrielle Johnson's face had haunted him in every financial news story of the past few years, and why the prodigy triplets who accompanied her seemed strangely familiar. Michael Whitman sat frozen at his desk, the realization washing over him in waves. The photograph on his iPad couldn't be denied. Gabrielle Johnson was the same woman he had once loved at Harvard, the same woman his mother had convinced him had betrayed him. And the three brilliant girls who appeared in every article about the Johnson Foundation, they had his eyes, his chin, his genetic legacy. Sir? His assistant's voice broke through his shock. Your mother is here for your 2 o'clock. Eleanor Whitman swept into the office with the imperial confidence that had dominated Boston society for decades. The board is concerned about your sudden interest in Gabrielle Johnson, she began without preamble. Michael turned his iPad toward her, the photograph from 15 years ago prominently displayed. When were you going to tell me, Mother? Eleanor's composure faltered for just a moment before she regained control. Tell you what exactly? That Gabrielle Johnson is the same woman I dated at Harvard. That those 3 girls, her daughters, are exactly the right age to be mine. His voice grew colder with each word. That everything about this feels like something you orchestrated. Don't be dramatic, Michael. Ancient history isn't relevant to our current business concerns. Michael stood, towering over his mother. Those photos you showed me, the ones that supposedly proved she was cheating, were they real? The silence that followed was answer enough. Across town, Gabrielle reviewed plans for the 15th anniversary gala of the Johnson Foundation. a concert benefiting children's health care where Madison would perform as a guest soloist with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. The event represented more than just a celebration. It would mark the announcement of a global partnership with the WHO to expand the Johnson Protocol to developing countries. Everything must be perfect, Gabrielle instructed her event coordinator. This partnership will bring our treatment to children who would never otherwise have access. The guest list is nearly finalized, her assistant replied. The governor, both senators, and every major hospital director in New England have confirmed. Later that afternoon, Madison practiced relentlessly in the music room of their Beacon Hill home, the Tchaikovsky violin concerto flowing from her instrument with emotional depth that belied her 14 years. "You sound magnificent," Gabrielle said from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. Madison lowered her violin. "It has to be perfect, Mom. Everyone important will be there." "You're ready," Gabrielle assured her. "You've been ready for months." While Madison practiced, Morgan and Mila huddled in Morgan's bedroom laboratory, comparing the DNA results they'd secretly obtained. 99.8% probability, Morgan announced, pointing to the screen. "These genetic markers confirm it. Michael Whitman is our biological father." Mila's eyes widened. "Should we tell Mom we know?" "Not yet," Madison said, entering the room after finishing her practice. "Let's gather more information first. The gala is in 3 days. We need to focus on that." The girls had no way of knowing that Michael had spent the afternoon confronting his mother in the Whitman family mansion, his voice echoing through rooms filled with generations of privilege. "You manipulated those photos?" Michael demanded, his voice rising. "You made me believe she cheated?" Eleanor's composure finally cracked. She was unsuitable. A scholarship student from Roxbury with no connections, no breeding. I did what was necessary to protect you from ruining your future. I have 3 daughters I've never met because of your manipulation. Michael's fist came down on an antique table, rattling priceless porcelain. 15 years, Mother. 15 years I've missed. Eleanor's eyes narrowed calculatingly. Think strategically, Michael. The Johnson Foundation is valued at over $4 billion now. This connection could be useful in ways you haven't considered. Useful? Michael recoiled. They're my children, not business assets. That evening, the triplets received confirmation of what they already suspected. The DNA comparison showed a 99.9% match with Michael Whitman's publicly available genetic profile, part of a feature Whitman Industries had done on genetic predisposition to leadership. Each sister processed the revelation differently. Madison wept quietly, years of wondering finally answered. Morgan analyzed the implications with clinical detachment, and Mila sat silently, contemplating what this discovery meant for their family. Do we confront him? Madison asked, wiping away tears. Not without telling Mom first, Mila insisted. This affects her more than anyone. As the gala approached, Gabrielle rehearsed her speech in her office, unaware of the storm brewing around her. 15 years ago, I began a journey with my 3 daughters, never imagining where it would lead us. Meanwhile, Michael found himself parked outside Symphony Hall, watching Madison during a public rehearsal. The girl's talent was extraordinary, her passionate playing so reminiscent of his own grandmother, a concert pianist whose gift had skipped his generation, but apparently resurfaced in a granddaughter she would never know. Emotion overwhelmed him as he watched this daughter he had never met command the stage with such presence. He sat in his car long after the rehearsal ended, trying to gather courage for what must come next. The final piece fell into place when Eleanor made her move, approaching Catherine Chen at a hospital fundraiser. Dr. Chen, how lovely to see you, Eleanor said with practiced charm. I understand you're on the board of the Johnson Foundation now. Catherine's expression remained neutral. For many years, yes. My son has expressed interest in discussing potential collaborations. Perhaps you could arrange an invitation to the upcoming gala? Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion evident, but professional courtesy prevailed. "I'll see what I can do." 2 days before the gala, Gabrielle was reviewing final preparations when her assistant handed her the updated guest list. She scanned it absently until one name stopped her cold: Michael Whitman, CEO, Whitman Industries. "There must be a mistake," Gabrielle said, her voice unnaturally calm. "No mistake. Dr. Chen approved the addition yesterday. Should I remove him?" Gabrielle stared at the name that had once meant everything to her, the name she had carefully excised from her life, the name she had never spoken to her daughters. "No," she finally said. "It's been 15 years. That's long enough to bury ghosts." As she set down the list, her phone pinged with a text from Madison. "Extra practice running late. Morgan and Mila with me. Don't wait up." Gabrielle smiled, unaware that her daughters weren't practicing at all, but rather finalizing their own investigation into the man who would be attending the gala, the man whose eyes they saw every time they looked in a mirror. While Gabrielle stared at Michael's name on the guest list, she couldn't imagine that her daughters had discovered the truth, nor that the man who had rejected her 15 years ago was about to enter a crowded theater, witness the brilliance of the daughter he never knew, and publicly face the consequences of his past actions. The symphony hall glittered under crystal chandeliers, their light catching on the white orchid arrangements strategically placed throughout the grand space. Boston's elite moved through the crowd with practiced ease, champagne flutes in hand as a chamber orchestra played softly in the background. The 15th anniversary gala of the Johnson Foundation represented more than just a celebration. It was Gabrielle's coronation as one of Boston's most influential figures. Michael Whitman adjusted his bow tie, scanning the room with growing anxiety. At 42, he still commanded attention with his tall frame and distinguished features, though fine lines now framed his green eyes. As CEO of Whitman Industries, he had doubled the family company's value and expanded into 47 countries. Yet tonight, none of that mattered. "Remember why we're here, Michael," Eleanor Whitman murmured beside him, elegant in midnight blue despite her 68 years. Catherine Chen indicated the foundation might be open to discussing acquisition of their biotechnology division. Michael nodded absently, his attention caught by a program for the evening's performance. The young violinist on the cover looked hauntingly familiar, her features stirring something deep in his memory. A sudden hush fell over the room. Michael turned toward the entrance and felt the world stop turning. Gabrielle Johnson entered the hall like a force of nature, her petrol blue gown accentuating the confident grace she carried herself with now. Her once wild black curls had been transformed into a sophisticated frame for her face, which had matured from pretty to striking. But it wasn't her physical transformation that stole Michael's breath. It was the aura of undeniable power that surrounded her. Then his gaze fell to the 3 teenage girls accompanying her, and his heart nearly stopped. 3 pairs of green eyes identical to his own. 3 faces that combined Gabrielle's features with his in a genetic harmony impossible to deny. "Michael?" Eleanor's voice sounded distant as she followed his gaze. "What's happening?" The answer came from the master of ceremonies. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Gabrielle Johnson, founder and CEO of the Johnson Foundation for Children's Healthcare, accompanied by her daughters. Madison Johnson, our guest soloist for tonight, Morgan Johnson, recently recognized by MIT for her contributions to quantum mathematics, and Mila Johnson, the youngest research associate in the Foundation's history." Michael clutched a nearby table for support. 15 years, 3 daughters, an empire built while he'd been completely ignorant of their existence. Gabrielle spotted him immediately. Her eyes had always known how to find him in any crowd. For one fleeting moment, shock registered on her face before being replaced by unshakable composure. With a slight nod to her daughters, she continued greeting important guests as if nothing were amiss. "Did you know?" Michael whispered to his mother, anger rising like a tidal wave. "Did you know about them?" Eleanor didn't answer, but her tightened expression revealed everything. Madison made her way to the stage, positioning herself with her violin. When her fingers glided across the instrument, producing the first notes of Tchaikovsky's violin concerto, the hall fell into reverent silence. She played with a maturity that belied her 14 years, each note infused with emotion that seemed to reach into Michael's chest and squeeze. He watched, hypnotized. This girl, his daughter, played as if she'd been born for this moment. When the piece concluded, the hall erupted in thunderous applause. Gabrielle smiled with evident pride while the other two triplets embraced their sister. During the intermission that followed, Michael attempted to approach Gabrielle 3 times, only to be intercepted by discreet security personnel. On his 4th attempt, he found himself face to face with Morgan instead. "Can I help you, Mr. Whitman?" she asked, her analytical gaze assessing him with unsettling precision. You know who I am," Michael stammered. "Obviously, your face appears in Forbes regularly, and Whitman Industries competes with my mother's foundation's biotechnology division." Morgan tilted her head slightly. "Though I suspect your interest in me isn't professional, considering how you've been observing my family all evening." Before Michael could respond, Gabrielle materialized beside her daughter. "Morgan, darling, the governor is asking about your work in quantum cryptography. Would you mind speaking with him for a moment?" When Morgan walked away, Gabrielle faced Michael directly for the first time in 15 years. "Not here. Not now," she said quietly. "My daughters don't know who you are, and this is Madison's night." "Gabrielle, I didn't know. Please, 5 minutes." "The private library, 3rd floor, 15 minutes, she replied, walking away without waiting for his response. When Michael entered the elegant library, Gabrielle was already waiting, standing by the window. The city lights illuminated her profile, revealing the confident woman who had risen from the ashes of his abandonment. "They're mine," were his first words. "Biologically, yes. In every way that matters, no." Gabrielle turned to face him. "Their names are Johnson. The man listed as father on their birth certificates is unknown by my choice." "Why did you never tell me?" 15 years, Gabriel." Her laugh contained decades of bitterness refined into strength. "Tell you? You accused me of cheating, of getting pregnant for money, threw a check in my face, and told me to disappear from your life. How exactly was I supposed to have told you?" Michael staggered as if physically struck. "My mother, she showed me evidence, photos of you with another man, and you believed her without question, without giving me the benefit of the doubt after 3 years together." Gabrielle crossed her arms. "That other man was my cousin Paul, visiting from Montreal. Your mother paid to have those photos manipulated, just as she paid to have me expelled from the subsidized residency program." The revelation hit Michael like an avalanche. Memories of suspicious conversations with his mother, documents she asked him to sign, her insistence that he move on, everything now made terrible sense. "Our daughters, they're incredible," he said, his voice breaking. "Yes, they are." Madison enters Juilliard next semester. Morgan has already published 3 scientific papers and speaks 6 languages. Mila will likely follow my path in medicine. The pride in her voice was palpable. "All without a cent of your money, without your name, without your presence. I want to know them. I have rights." "Rights?" The word cracked like a whip. "Like, you forfeited any rights when you called me a Roxbury girl playing at belonging in Boston society. Remember those words, Michael? I do. Every syllable." At that moment, the library door burst open. Eleanor Whitman entered, followed by the 3 triplets. "So it's true," said Eleanor, her voice trembling slightly. "All these years, I have granddaughters." "Mother, get out of here," Michael ordered, but it was too late. Mila, the most observant of the 3, looked from Michael to her own hands, noting the striking similarity. "Mom!" Who is he to us? The silence that followed seemed eternal. Gabrielle glared at Eleanor with a look that promised retribution, then turned to her daughters with infinite gentleness. Madison, Morgan, Mila, this is Michael Whitman. He is your biological father. While the murmurs of shock rippled through Symphony Hall and smartphones captured the moment that would headline tomorrow's news, Gabrielle couldn't imagine that her public exposure would trigger not only the downfall of the Whitman empire, but also an unexpected opportunity for healing for her daughters and perhaps for herself. The headlines the next morning were merciless. Whitman heir discovers daughters at charity gala. CEO rejected pregnancy, lost billion-dollar empire. Dr. Johnson, from rejected to billionaire. The symphony of notifications on Gabrielle's phone began at 5 in the morning and hadn't stopped since. In the luxurious suite she occupied at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, Gabrielle prepared coffee while the triplets processed the previous night's events. The public exposure hadn't been planned, but once it began, Gabrielle had decided that complete truth was preferable to the half-truths that would haunt her daughters. He looked devastated, Madison commented, flipping through the Boston Globe where a photograph showed Michael watching her violin performance, unshed tears evident in his eyes. 15 years is a long time, Gabrielle answered carefully, measuring her words. People change, grow, or don't, Morgan added pragmatically, not looking up from her tablet where she analyzed the market's reaction to the scandal. The mathematics don't lie. The probability of him seeking information about you after you became famous approaches 100%. He chose not to look. Mila, always the most empathetic, studied her mother's face. Do you think he'll want to know us now? Before Gabrielle could respond, her phone rang. Catherine Chen's name flashed on the screen. Have you seen the news? Catherine asked without preamble. Eleanor Whitman resigned from the Whitman Industries board this morning. Their stock dropped 12% at market opening. Gabrielle felt a strange absence of the satisfaction she'd imagined for so many years. Instead, an unexpected sensation of release washed over her. The girls are processing everything. They're strong like their mother, Catherine replied. By the way, I received a call from Michael. He wants to arrange a meeting on your terms. After hanging up, Gabrielle gathered her daughters. Michael wants to meet you. The decision is yours, individually and collectively. I'll support whatever choice you make. 3 days later, at the neutral and public Boston Public Garden, the triplets met their biological father for the first time. Gabrielle observed from a distance, allowing this moment to belong exclusively to them. Michael arrived precisely on time, alone and visibly nervous. He carried 3 small boxes wrapped in silver paper. I didn't bring gifts to buy your affection, he explained when Madison commented on the packages. These are just fragments of family history that you have a right to know. Inside each box was a simple item. For Madison, an antique musical score that had belonged to her great-grandmother, a classical pianist. For Morgan, a set of handwritten equations from her grandfather, an aerospace engineer. For Mila, a silver stethoscope from the early 20th century, a family heirloom. I never knew about you, Michael said, his voice breaking. That's the truth, though it's not an excuse. I believed lies without questioning, allowed prejudices to blind me, and lost the first 15 years of the most important lives I helped create. Morgan, always direct, asked, What do you want from us now? Nothing you're not willing to give, he answered. Time, perhaps. Occasional conversations, getting to know you on your terms, not mine. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, no promises had been made, no commitments established, just the tentative possibility of future contact. As the girls returned to their mother, Michael approached Gabrielle for the first time since the gala. They're extraordinary, he said. Each one of them. Yes, they are, Gabrielle agreed. I've resigned as company president. Michael informed her. "I'm restructuring my life, starting with the truth. That night, 15 years ago, I was wrong in every possible way." Gabrielle observed the man before her, no longer the arrogant young heir who had discarded her as inadequate, but a man broken by the late understanding of what he had lost. "You were wrong," she agreed, without rancor. "But perhaps that was necessary. If we had stayed together, I might have been content being Mrs. Whitman, living in the shadow of your family empire. Instead, I built something entirely my own." "You don't need me," Michael stated. "None of you need me." "No, we don't," Gabrielle confirmed. "And that's the fundamental difference between what we are now and what we were then. Any relationship you develop with our daughters will be based on choice, not need or obligation." A week later, while supervising the installation of cutting-edge equipment in the new pediatric wing named after her mother, Gabrielle received an envelope. Inside, she found documents transferring 30% of Whitman Industries shares to a trust fund in the triplets' names, with a simple note: "Not to buy forgiveness, but to return what was always rightfully theirs." Gabrielle tucked the documents into her folder. Later, she would discuss with her daughters what to do with this unexpected inheritance. Perhaps they would sell the shares and expand the foundation. Perhaps they would keep them as a reminder of the past. The decision would be theirs. As she walked down the hospital corridor, her phone vibrated with a message from Mila. "We're having dinner with him next week. Is that okay with you?" Gabrielle smiled. The cycle of hurt that had begun on that winter night was finally breaking. Not through spectacular revenge, but through the simple reality of a woman who refused to be defined by abandonment and instead defined herself by her achievements. "That's fine," she responded. "It's time to look forward." From her office window, Gabrielle contemplated Boston's skyline. The city that had nearly destroyed her now bowed to her success. Roxbury, Harvard, Massachusetts General, the Johnson Medical Tower. Each location a chapter in the story she had written not with resentment, but with determination. When Madison called to discuss her next recital, Morgan to share a breakthrough in her algorithm, and Mila to ask advice about a surgical technique, Gabrielle felt a profound certainty. True success wasn't the financial empire she had built, nor Michael's public exposure, but the three extraordinary young women who were her greatest legacy. Justice hadn't come through Michael Whitman's destruction, but through the full and complete life Gabrielle had built without him. A life so rich and meaningful that his absence had become, in the end, completely irrelevant. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.